Hi, this is Alex Bryant, President of East West Associates. Thank you all for joining today, our webinar about establishing manufacturing and sourcing in Thailand, the why and the how. I appreciate you all attending. We've got a full hour schedule, and so we'll move forward on this. I know we've got a lot of people signed up for this event, so we'll kind of jump right in because I've got a lot of people sent questions that they wanted us to ask. So we're going to try to get to all the questions. If we do not have time to get to everyone's question, because we got a lot sent in yesterday and this morning, then we will answer that separately after the webinar. So with that, on the housekeeping side, we've got questions. If you would like to ask additional questions, you'll go to the control panel and you'll see where it says chat and questions. You can send those questions to us during the presentation. We're very comfortable with we'll ask the questions. We encourage questions throughout this whole process. We pulled together 13 of the questions we've got. We'll show those, but if you have additional questions, please feel free to send this to us during the presentation. Okay, so that's a brief bit of housekeeping. I'm going to briefly introduce East West Associates, just very briefly explain who we are, then and our subsequent webinar series for third quarter. And we'll then move into an introduction to speakers who are very knowledgeable individuals, a brief overview of how we got here with the current supply chain situation. We're going to provide then a brief overview on ASEAN, a further deep dive into Thailand, two brief case studies of U.S. companies that we work with, what they've successfully done in Thailand recently, and then we'll dive into the questions. The presentation itself, we'll hit the questions, probably about 40 minutes of questions. So again, please feel comfortable asking us questions and engaging the speakers who are quite knowledgeable. All right, very briefly, here's East West. We reside and operate in 5 markets: the U.S., China, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, etc., Mexico, and Central Eastern Europe. All the executives, East West Associates, have had P&L responsibilities for running Western companies on the ground in our 5 markets, right? We get heavily involved in operational and global footprint questions, heavily involved in supply chain issues, identifying suppliers, qualifying suppliers, heavily involved in recruiting individuals, and heavily involved in having run and managed facilities on the ground in these different markets. And that could include everything from closing facilities to moving facilities to establishing. Obviously, in Thailand right now, a lot of the work we're doing in Thailand is geared toward really 2 sets of clients: those who are trying to diversify from China, whether it's supply chain manufacturing, and others that are establishing in Thailand really to service Southeast Asia. And you can see our brief introduction of our different industry sectors. Here's where we are based in our different regions. Point 2 on the webinar series. We've got these additional webinars coming up here in the next 2 months. We've got one on Mexico, operational and supply chain trends, one on Vietnam, a manufacturing supply chain network in Vietnam, one about electronic sourcing in China and Southeast Asia, and then fourthly, one out about Poland, Central Eastern Europe. You all will receive invitations to that, or you can go on our website and sign up for those. All right, so now we've got that out of the way. I want to get to much more important stuff, which is an introduction to speakers, Mark Plum and C. Blythe. Mark, why don't you start off and give us a brief background on yourself, if you would, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, hello, my name's Mark Plum, and I started out in Asia, living in Thailand in 1990, and was president of a company called Train Air Conditioning / American Standard, and then subsequently moved up to China and lived in China and as president of both of Briggs and Stratton, based out of Shanghai up until 2014, and then moved back to the States and joined up with Alex and East West Associates. So I have a pretty strong background in running fairly large operations from the MD level around manufacturing, air conditioning, appliances, engines, a lot of metal fabrication business. And then subsequently, we've been with Alex, we've been able to expand our business out of China as things have changed and more back into ASEAN, and as things have changed as more with the China situation, a lot of work recently in Central Eastern Europe, particularly Poland, as well as Mexico, as the economic landscape and the geopolitical landscape in China is changing And like a lot of us, we all went to China back in the mid 90s, and we can see now that a lot of changes. So my background has been in Asia, China, ASEAN for my whole working career, 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, would you provide your background, please?
Okay, thanks, Alex and Mark. My name's Steve Blythe. Hi, everyone. I'm an Australian. I've had about 20 years working in Asia. The late 1990s, I had 3 years in Thailand. Prior to that, I had a couple of years in South Korea. Also had 6 years working in Singapore, a couple of years in Taiwan, and 3 years in North America, mainly based in Toronto in Canada. During that time, I've had a number of regional MD roles, starting in 2005, responsible for Southeast Asia. I've established country offices, sales offices across the region, moved manufacturing from various markets, also had some experience and time in Japan, China, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Last 7 years, I've been back in Thailand. The industries I've worked in is automotive with Volvo cars. Worked in Taiwan, South Korea, Australia, and Canada with Volvo. Also, clean air technology, worked with Nederman Group in Thailand. Medical equipment and devices, was based in Singapore, setting up the regional office and opening up sales offices around Northeast and Southeast Asia. That was with Arjo Huntley. Also, experience in the construction industry and the jewelry industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So Steve is based in Bangkok. Mark is based here in the U.S., which is our model, right? Both of them lived in, Steve lives there now. Mark lived in Thailand and obviously China for a long time. So our model is to have experts on both sides of the pond. So now we'll tap into their knowledge, and let's kind of drive forward. The next part here will be part 4, which is going to be a brief overview of kind of how we got here, what's the current state, and really why Thailand is on the rise and how it's being affected by what's going on in China.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Let me just touch on this quickly. I mentioned a little bit about how China has really changed in the last 40 years, when it really began to open up 40 years ago to today. And as we all know, 40 years ago, a lot of us all went there, and it was really, a lot of us came there from Thailand, which was low-cost manufacturing, and then moved up to China, which was super low-cost manufacturing. And a lot of us were chasing two things: a large potential domestic China market and competitive labor. What's happened in 40 years ago, that made a lot of sense, and as people on the call probably know, that's changed, gradually been changing the last 10 years and rapidly changing the last 5 years as it pertains to labor costs, et cetera, et cetera. The labor costs continue to go up. We know that, and we'll talk about it later, where they're no longer the inexpensive labor in China, is in Asia, I should say. And then of course the tariffs, which are going on 4 years old now, which is for those who ship back to the States, has been really burdensome, up to 25%. Of course, COVID affected everybody, but it really affected China, I think, a little bit more. And Steve's going to talk about that as it pertains to Thailand. But long supply chains, bottlenecks, freight costs got up to, as many know, $20,000 for a 40-foot container. So all that's kind of said, China doesn't feel quite as good as it did 40 years ago, even as good as it felt 10 years ago. So people are now switching to either near sourcing, or at least away from China, or maybe a China +1 strategy, because a lot of guys have really established good supply chains, component supply in China, and maybe they're looking at keeping the component supply, and then have a +1 strategy, which then maybe ship those components to to Thailand or other places for assembly. And then for the people that are in China for China, that are selling domestically, then Thailand, those places don't really make a lot of sense. You got to really focus hard on China, and we just got to keep our eyes on the geopolitical, what's happening. in China vis-a-vis the USA, vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And I think we can safely say that labor costs are going to continue to go up. IP is going to continue to be under pressure. No foreseeable sight yet on reducing tariffs. So as China changes and as to what it was, it's going to really affect a lot of us, and where do we go to our next step is going to be very critical.
And Mark, I would add just to your point, most of the people who we know who are looking at Thailand are either there because they're servicing the Asian market, or they are in China and they're looking to diversify beyond China. That'd be
correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
And we just got in 2 questions asking about labor costs and labor availability, and we will be getting to those questions for you in the slides coming forward.
Sure, that's right.
Okay. So Mark, if you will take
yes. So let's move on to ASEAN overview. Yeah, so again, not trying to make this a primer for everybody, but ASEAN, as everyone can see, is 12 members, 638 million people. If you compare that to, it's larger than the EU, and it's half the size of India, half the size of China, but those are big numbers as compared to the USA and Japan. And what that really says to you is you can build in the ASEAN countries and trade within the ASEAN countries, and you can build in the ASEAN countries and trade with China as a member. So it's really quite a very attractive trading bloc that's going on. I think 25 years old now. Next slide, please. And this is Thailand specifically, some of the free trade agreements. And we won't spend a lot of time on this, but Thailand has been looking west and in Asia for many years, and Steve's going to talk about treaties with the USA that go back to the 1860s. So Thailand has some blemishes on different things over the years, but when it comes to business and trade and relations with outside the world, they have focused on that really, really well. And as a lot of us say, they've been around here. Thailand was really China before China was China. I was living there in 1990, and that was a low-cost manufacturing. That's where all the companies were. That's where and then a lot of those companies, global companies, then moved up to China because they were chasing, again, the inexpensive labor and the large domestic markets. But they also did not leave Thailand. So they had a footprint in both places. So Thailand is really equipped for growing it back again in the future. Next slide, please, Alex. Yeah, so just a quick question that I think already kind of came up, and we're going to talk only really about Thailand today, but just to give a quick view of average salaries and then social benefits and inflation. So on salaries, if you look at China, that equates to about $3.50, $4 an hour, that 9,000. You can see Thailand is about 60% of that, and then Vietnam is about, again, only 25-30% of China and about half of Thailand. So we're going to talk a little bit later on what industries are really strong for Thailand and what industries are really strong for Vietnam, and Steve will touch on that a little bit. But what people forget a lot of times is these next 2 things. There's labor rates, and then there's the total labor package. And as you can see, both China and Vietnam, which, as you know, are top-down command economies, really dictate the social benefit packages, and they're a healthy piece of your labor package. China 30 to 40%, Vietnam. Thailand, as you can see, and Philippines, but Thailand, because it's more market driven, is 7% as to your social benefit package. And then wage inflation, for the same reasons. China becomes a top-down command economy, just dictates your wages every year. Thailand is far more market driven, and their salary increases, expected wage increases, have been 4 to 8% for the last 30 years. I mean, there's ups and downs, but the big difference is Thailand takes the market into consideration when they set wage inflation. It's not just top down driven. Next slide, please, Alex.
Sure.
Yeah. And now I'm going to turn this over to Steve now. Steve's going to talk a little bit more specifically about Thailand itself as to how it fits in. Steve? Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Next, Alex. Yeah, so Thailand's the second largest economy in Southeast Asia. The industrial and services sectors account for 92% of the country's GDP. It's worth mentioning 27% of total GDP is manufacturing and 12% is tourism. The industrial development's primarily focused in 3 provinces in the southeast of Bangkok, the Eastern Economic Corridor, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. Also, Thailand's the logistics hub for ASEAN transport, and we'll talk about the infrastructure that supports that. And also, it's located in the centre of the ASEAN market. And I think Mark talked a little bit about the opportunities, you know, if you are based in Thailand in the ASEAN market with the free trade agreement that's encapsulates Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam, amongst others. Next slide, thanks. This is pretty self-explanatory, and this is a very small sample of the US companies that are in Thailand, but you can see, you know, some very well-established companies, and as Mark mentioned, many of them have been here for 30, 40 years. So there is a long history, and there's a good reason why there's a long history, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the Q&A. But yeah, Thailand really does have a huge amount of US companies already. This is just to give you a little bit of an idea of where the industrial estates are. You see Bangkok in the center. To the north of Bangkok, there's a couple of the older industrial estates, but the biggest, major and largest industrial estates are actually between Bangkok and Pattaya, the 2 red stars in the center and down the bottom. And to give you a feel for it, Pattaya is about 125 kilometers from Bangkok. Also, you see we've highlighted Suvarnabhumi Airport there, just next to Bangkok, and that is the one of the biggest cargo airports. It's definitely, I think it's the biggest in Asia, Southeast Asia. It's the 28th largest airport by cargo in the world, similar size to Heathrow. And then you see down near Pattaya Lamchabang Port, that's the 20th busiest port in the world. Very major port there as well. If we can move to the next slide, please, Alex. Yeah, so this gives you a little bit of a feel. So the Eastern Economic Corridor is the designated investment promotion zone, and there's 3 provinces, Chonburi, Rayong, and Chachoengsao. They're all located east of Bangkok, anywhere from 1 to 3 hours driving distance. So there's been significant upgrades in the last 10 or 12 years on the motorway and high speed and the expressway. Also, there's work on high speed railway to connect all of the areas. As I mentioned, there's Suvarnabhumi Airport, but there's also 2 other airports supporting that region. There's the old airport in central Bangkok, Don Muang, and also in Rayong, there's Utapao Airport, which was built by the US military in the mid-60s to support B-52s. That's now being converted to an airport for both passengers and cargo. So there is 2 airports there supporting Suvarnabhumi. There's also 3 other ports supporting Lamchabang, smaller ports that can handle smaller ships, or if they offload from the major ships and move containers to the smaller ports, depending on where they need to go. Next slide, please, Alex. Yeah, some of the Thailand's manufacturing environment. The key manufacturing industries, obviously automobiles and automotive parts. So Thailand is the largest manufacturer in ASEAN of automobiles, and globally is number 10. Electronic appliances and components, industrial machinery, heavy light industries, computers, computer parts, chemicals, plastics, textile, furniture. It's probably worth mentioning biofuel. Thailand's number 1 in ASEAN and number 7 globally for biofuel production. And they are moving ahead with bio industries. Key manufacturing, machinery 23%, followed by electronics, chemicals, plastics, food, wood, automobiles, and automotive for the major. The main export trading partners, the US, China, European Union, Japan, they all hold about 10 to 12% of the exports out of Thailand. And that, I might hand back to Mark for the next slide, unless you had anything to add on this slide, Mark.
No, I think that's really good. So yeah, we wanted to give a little overview of ASEAN and then how Thailand fits into ASEAN. Now we want to talk a little bit more about Thailand and what it's trying to do and where it's trying to go from a business standpoint. And this is the 2023 targeted industries, which have been pretty similar over the last few years. And these are industries that the Board of Investment and Thailand government really are trying to focus on. And you can see there's biotechnology, there's advanced food, as Steve mentioned, biofuels, medical device, really a lot of emphasis there, intelligent electronics, Internet of Things, a lot of products. Thailand is encouraging is to come maybe with manufactured products such as appliances and things with electronics capabilities, Internet of Things capabilities, automation, robotics, next gen automotive, and kind of slash EV automotive is really a big thing there. Driverless cars, all that kind of stuff, digital. As Steve said, avionics and logistics, three major airports down south, several seaports. High value tourism is probably, a lot of you probably know, probably have been there, is a big industry in Thailand, and medical tourism has really taken off over the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years with some pretty famous hospitals that work on that. Defense, again, because I think the strong relationship with the USA and maybe geopolitically trying to balance, with the USA a little bit. And then, of course, there's human HR. So those are the kind of 12 things that the government and the Board of Investment are really focusing on. And if we work a lot with companies who are looking at these kind of industries and how they may be able to slide into some of the areas that the Board of Investment is really encouraging, and how your company might be a good fit. Next slide, please, Alex. Yeah, so and this is just one slide. I mean, there's a lot of information working with the Board of Investment, and we've had Board of Investment is a couple of things I like to say about them. We've worked with them now pretty steady for going back on 10 years. And unlike a lot of countries, China, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand sets their policies at the government level, the national level, and then it works down from there. So you work with the Board of Investment on what you're trying to do. Once you work all that out, then that gets set in policy, and then you can take that, throughout the country. But primarily the EEC is where a lot of the incentives are. So you're not going to each individual park like in China, like in Malaysia, like in the Philippines, and having to negotiate something with each individual park, which can be really cumbersome. And just a quick overview, you can go anywhere. If you have something that is really super high on the Board of Investment as what they're looking for, EV vehicles are things that are really quite high, batteries are really quite high. You can get up to 10 plus years of no corporate tax at all, and all the way on down to to 3 years. So it's not uncommon to get 5 years and 8 years of no corporate income tax, and an additional 50% for 5 more years of only paying 50% for 5 more years of your corporate income tax. So Board of Investment is really is a good group to work with, and if you have something that you can both come to agree on, it can be very, very productive. Next slide, please, Alex.
Yeah,
Sorry, Mark.
Go ahead.
Probably one worth mentioning is that the BOI operates under the Office of the Prime Minister, so it really cuts through the bureaucracy in Thailand. I think once you get the approval from BOI, you really don't have any significant issues with the bureaucracy at local and regional level.
That's exactly correct. And if you contrast that for those who've been around China or the Philippines or Malaysia, you'll really appreciate that. As I said, we've had, we East West have had, and going back for many years, good relationships, and that's exactly true. Once you get it all put together, it runs, and the Board of Investment and the large industrial parks really work in concert with each other to make your life pretty easy.
Yeah, and on the point of the Board of Investment, smart individuals, East West is looking to, East West and Board of Investment are looking to establish 1 or 2 webinars this year. So those interested can be on the lookout for that, so we could provide further introduction to Board of Investment here, and the webinars will be here in the US. Okay. All right, Mark, I guess you want to provide 2 case studies of companies.
Yeah, so yeah, I would do. These are two recent case studies. First one is a USA, and this one is we've just completed actually, of a consumer home appliances, where it's a kind of an interesting model. It goes back 20 years, where they started buying components in China, as in like 100% of their components, and then brought them into the USA, and then did all their assembly, testing, packaging, end-of-line auditing in the USA, and then sold primarily in the USA. Well, okay, that worked for a long time. A little cumbersome, but kind of worked until the 2 things happened we've already talked about. The duties, all these components fell under their SIC codes, all fell under 25%. That wasn't good. And of course, and then the labor costs, both in China, but more importantly, their labor costs in the USA to assemble, test, and package was going up all the time. So their cost, they had a lot of cost pressures, duties coming in, higher labor in China, and of course higher labor in the USA to assemble. So we've known these fellows for a while, so they asked us to kind of get involved and give some ideas and some thoughts. So first thing you kind of look at is, okay, maybe you can just get a couple of your suppliers to go ahead and do the whole complete turnkey and finish the product, assemble, test, and package in China, and then ship to the USA. So that helped a little bit as to the labor cost, because China labor costs are less than the USA, but it didn't really help it didn't help on the duty situation. So your labor costs were down, however, it didn't solve the duty situation. So next thing that we said, well, let's look at how else we can do this. Are there other countries in ASEAN that maybe we could do that? And so we did roughly a 3-country study, and thinking, and we also included Mexico, because as a lot of bringing stuff back to the States, geographically, Mexico can make some sense, right? So a note of this, these were consumer home appliances, but they were more, they were smaller appliances. They weren't like a refrigerator. So the container loading and the freight costs were not prohibitive from Asia. So long story short, we recommended Thailand. We recommended Thailand for a variety of reasons, but not 2 of the, of course, main ones obviously were duty-free to the USA from Thailand, and labor costs were approximately half of China, in about, so the labor costs were extremely competitive. And the way it's set up, we were able then to establish with local content to get that low duty 0 to 5% to the States, to be classified as a Thai produced product. You have to have 40% of your product value in Thailand, and that includes your parts and your components, your labor, your packaging, your energy costs, everything. So they don't make it that restrictive to get to that 40% for local content to be classified as a Thai company, to then be classified for preferential duties. So project turned out really well, and so it's ongoing. Next one, it was a second one, was quite a bit bigger project. This was a large USA manufacturer, actually number 2 in the world in what they do. Iconic brand name, had been in factories in the USA, factories in Europe, and factories in China. The China ones were set up originally to produce some of their lower cost products to bring back to the USA, and some to ship down to Australia and New Zealand. Of course, the same thing. First thing they wanted to do was expand in China. This is just starting with the before the duties actually, and see if they could find a larger area to build a new factory. What happened is they were landlocked. So we did that, but that didn't really work out because you weren't really gaining that much. And once you move past 30 kilometers away from where you were, you've lost all your labor anyway. So we recommended we do a 6-country study. We did that for them. Looking at Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, and then of course China, and decide where would be the best place to set up the operation. And again, at that time, we chose Thailand, and there's and some of the and we'll talk in a little bit about the metrics of why you chose, but we were involved in the site selection. After we did the site, well, we were involved initially with the Board of Investment and really working closely with our company and the board to bring in the products that the board really wanted. We brought in more of the higher end products with electronics. We brought in a design center and a test lab, which was quite high on the Board of Investments, what they were looking for, which was not the original plan, but that all became part of the not negotiation, but just the discussions with the board to say, here's what we'd like you to do, and then our company said, yeah, we can do that, and then we got all that done, picked the site, used, as Steve mentioned, there's 4 or 5 large industrial estates. We know them all really well. We chose one. We helped them buy the land. We did the local engineering and design work with local Thai companies. Did that. Project managed the construction and then the recruitment of the early on senior execs. So from the time we got the green light to getting the factory up and running was just shy of 2 years or 20 months. So really worked out quite well. And next slide, please, Alex. The financial incentives went like this. With working with BOI, we were able to get 8 years of no tax, corporate income tax, and 50% for additional 5 years. So this helped us. If we would have stayed in China, this was the pro forma plans from the company. If they had stayed in China, because they had already used up all their tax incentives, they accepted they would have. They allowed them to save 30.52 million in the tariff payments they would have paid. And as far as cost reductions, they saved over 22 million in tax savings, which they were able to avoid by being in Thailand, not China. Their labor savings was 5 years, 4.3 million for 5 years, and the raw materials, because we were able to really find some opportunities down there. Now and then their growth, they grew 42% and 53% in both sales and revenue. And these numbers that were here, this all came out of their incentives, or I should say their pro formas, and then their actual operating costs. So again, really a successful project. And the main drivers were great work with the Board of Investment, lower costs for labor, lower costs for tax, great availability of high quality labor. As we said, Thailand was doing this stuff that China's been doing 40 years ago, and a good supply base of components and raw materials, because the auto industry really has driven a lot of that. So all in all, really a good project.
Yeah, the positive one for them. So then we're going to hit the questions, and these are the 13 questions that we got over the last day or so, and we've also got a bunch more that popped in while we're doing the talking. So why don't we just kind of jump right into them now? And Mark and Steve, I'll just kind of throw these out to you all, and you can answer them. But Mark, the first one is about the why and the how. Number one.
Yeah, we kind of talked that, but I'll kind of talk about the first two kind of quickly. Why and the how. The why is, it's really, why is Thailand so good? Well, it's because it's got a good duty situation with the States. It's got a great relationship with ASEAN. It has a pro business environment. It's an easy place to work, easy place to live. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of positives. As far as industry sectors, we kind of talked about that. There's the 12 of them that the Board of Investment is really focusing on. And I'm willing to bet that most everybody on this call has their company somehow would fit into one of those 12 industry sectors that really the board is focusing on. And then, yeah, so anyway, so that's kind of those two. I'll let Steve maybe talk a little bit about, 3 and 4, maybe perhaps, huh?
Yeah, Steve, you talked a little bit about the industry sectors that are probably better to go to China and Vietnam, and which are the ones staying in Thailand and the challenges there.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if it involves low skills and a high labor content, either should stay in China where you are, or Vietnam should be considered because of the significantly lower labor costs. They're a third of China and half of Thailand. So low skills, high labor, Vietnam is what you really should be considered. Also, it isn't an area that the BOI supports, and Mark had an interesting discussion with the BOI about a low skill, high labor business, and the BOI basically said, they aren't interested and they don't support that type of business. I'm not sure if you want to add anything there, Mark.
Yeah, no, it was quite interesting. As I said, this was, we know at the director level of BOI, and we became pretty good friends. And this one manufacturer was making fasteners. I don't want to get into too many details, but pretty basic fasteners for roofing products, and a lot of labor and a lot of just raw material. And he said, Mark, he said, we like you on certain projects, but this one probably something you may want to look elsewhere on. So that was, I felt that we didn't waste our time on either side, and we moved to Vietnam pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing about BOI, that they give you very clear direction, and not afraid to give you a clear answer, even if it isn't in there necessarily in their short-term benefit.
Yeah, no, that would agree with that. I got some additional questions popping in the ones we have here, so I'll just go through them. One is a question about the question was this manufacturer wants to know about, is there a net inflow or a net outflow of companies these days in and out of Thailand? It's clearly an inflow of companies coming into Thailand.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
And this company, this executive noted that he had been in Thailand before, about 15 so years ago, and that there had been some flooding in Thailand, and he was asking what the situation with that is, because it was a while ago, but there was flooding back then, and what the government's done to address that.
Let me take a first whack at that, and then Steve can take a more updated whack at that. Yeah, that was in 2010 or 2012, and really up by Ayutthaya, which is north. And it was really the way the government and the provinces handled the water flow with the levees. And yeah, big flooding problems in Ayutthaya and a couple of the industrial parks up by Saraburi. I was just in one of the parks that flooded 2012 a month ago. That's 3 weeks ago. And they took great pains to take me around to show me all the new pumping stations, all the new underwater irrigation. I'm not saying you don't worry about flooding. You have to worry about. You have to keep an eye on it. But they've been a lot of mitigation and remedies have been put in since then. And then down south, where Steve has talked about the EEC economic corridor. The flooding really wasn't so prominent down there. So this was really an Ayutthaya, greater Ayutthaya area north. And I think they've mitigated most of those issues. Steve, you might want to add to that.
I agree. The older estates to the north of Thailand, north of Bangkok, they were the ones that suffered the most. One of the companies I joined in Thailand, I joined them just a year after they had moved, a couple of years after they'd moved from north of Bangkok into one of the industrial estates in the Eastern Economic Corridor. And effectively, they claim that they are flood proof. And having worked there and been there through a couple of heavy rainy seasons, there was no impact on the estates. The issue through Thailand is obviously getting the infrastructure getting to and from the industrial estates. And I think one of the big issues was that some of the major roads were cut as well as estates, the industrial estates in north of Bangkok were flooded. And that isn't such an issue in the south of Bangkok in the EEC, simply because of the infrastructure and the investments that are put into the infrastructure there.
I mean, one that you guys would all recognize, Honda was devastated with their facilities up there in west of west of Ayutthaya and north of Bangkok.
We face same thing whether we're in the Philippines or Vietnam or other locations as well. Question here that kind of came forward was on question 5. We've had a bunch of assets. We'll go ahead and use it about Thailand comparing to Vietnam and China, say on lease rates, building costs, business park options. Can you all, Mark, can you address that?
Yeah, sure. We're just deep in a project on that right now. On lease rates, again, you gotta, if you go to China and you're in the SIP or some of the other industrial parks, to lease, you're anywhere between $3 and $4.50 per square meter, right? Thailand, if you go to some of the larger industrial estates, WHA, Amata, Pintok, you might be 50 cents to $1 higher, $4 to $5. But now you're in an industrial estate that's really supportive. If you go outside the industrial estate, you're down to the China rates of about $3, per square meter lease per year. Building costs, pretty similar. The architects and engineers and the designers are all local. They've done a lot of stuff. China, if you have something they're really interested in, they'll get some government support. But typically now, I would say that the building costs are lease costs are on par with China, and the building costs are on par with China. As far as industrial parks, and as I said a little earlier, the combination of Board of Investment and some of these larger industrial parks like Amata, like as I said, like WHA, like Pintok, like Nova Nakorn, which we know these guys all pretty well, can make your life pretty easy. Whether you're leasing, if you want to go there and have an existing pre-built building, they exist anywhere from 1,000 square meters to 5,000 square meters. If you need something larger, sometimes they can link two together. So those exist as we speak today in Amata, in Pintok, in WHA. And if you decide you want to and you want to own and then just lease, or you want to go there and have a build to suit and lease back, there's large developers there working with their architect and engineering firms that will design the building for you. You buy the land, you transfer the land back to them. You work, of course, with BOI on all this. They build to suit, and then they'll lease it back to you for anywhere from 5, 10, 15 years at a rate that you work on. And then you have a facility that's really designed. So if you have a lot of internal things you need, clean rooms, really large painting systems, things like that, sometimes that makes a lot of sense. And as our client did on case study number 2, he wanted to own everything. So we helped him buy the land, we helped him negotiate with the tax incentives, and then then we hired the designers, hired the general contractors, and built the building. So now, and as Steve said, in Thailand, you can own everything. So this company now, again, who's the second largest in the world, has 100% owned entity of roughly 400,000 square feet, 800 people in the Rayong area. And it's become a showpiece factory for them to show the rest of their area. So yeah,
it really has. That's good. Questions came in. One was around the Thai labor. The question was, this is a company talking about how they had heard that in Vietnam there was a struggle to get mid-level engineers and upper-level engineers in Vietnam, and to find them and also get them to stay. They wanted to understand for Thailand, how does Thailand compare about getting good engineers, good skilled labor, good mid-level managers and above? They have the educational system, they have universities, how is Thailand compared to, say, China or Vietnam?
Yeah, Steve, you want to talk about like Thomasod and King Mongkut and Chulalongkorn? Yeah.
Thailand, as Mark mentioned, they were the China before China, and they've really moved on from that. They've invested heavily in what I would call TAFE colleges or polytechnics, technical colleges, and they've really ensured that there is a strong workforce in potential employees coming in, year out with very good degrees, very high standard. They have a lot of international teachers. It's not just that they're relying on Thai resources. So that's not an issue in Thailand. And that's a little bit why Vietnam is considered for low skill, high labor content, because they don't have the engineers. They don't have the educational system that's been in place for decades like Thailand. I remember a friend of mine who in the 1980s had air conditioning factories assembling compressors in Thailand, and already some of the Australian technical colleges, they were working together with the Thai technical colleges to ensure that they were able to train up the skilled people, engineers, to be able to support the development of that industry in Thailand. So that really isn't an issue in Thailand.
Right, you're running into
and Steve, you wanted me to talk a little bit about, and then on the opposite end of that is, some of the more lower labor, like a lot of countries are aging out, right? The young people don't want to work in the factories, and the people are getting older. With people coming in from Myanmar and things for more of the lower level labor stuff that can kind of help balance everything.
I mean, Thailand is aging, and as you go through development, younger people don't want to work in the factories like their parents did. Thailand's been proactive and actively encouraging workers, particularly from Myanmar, Cambodia, so they border Thailand. So there's 2 million registered workers from Myanmar in Thailand at the moment, and 1 million registered workers from Cambodia. So that's 3 million registered workers, adding to the already 40 million strong workforce in Thailand. It's also estimated there's another 2 million unregistered workers from these two countries. So effectively there's 5 million there, adding about 12 to 14% onto the existing workforce. Also, Thailand is an education hotspot for other countries around Thailand. So there is a hell of a lot of young people from Myanmar and Cambodia, Laos, who come to Thailand, high school, technical colleges, and then end up in the workforce as well. So Thailand has been very proactive there, understanding that they need to make sure that they have people available to support. Particularly, a lot of these end up in manufacturing. As I mentioned, that's more than a quarter of their GDP, and also in tourism. So Thailand has been proactive there and is aware of what some other countries have suffered from.
Yeah, that's a smart move. While we're taking with these questions, another question came in that is similar to question 9, so we'll go to that one. What this executive was talking about, the fact that they are looking to, right now they're currently in the process of evaluating making a move from China to Thailand, a relocation, right? And the issue there is, number one, if they make the relocation move to Thailand, a lot of the raw materials are coming out of China, right? Will remain to come out of China. They don't know how many, but it's a pretty good, significant piece of it they think will come out of China. And so then they want to make sure that whatever they do to it and however they manufacture those Chinese components, how do they get around the tariffs? And then also the question of how difficult it is to close a facility in China. So Mark, why don't you tackle that one first and see that?
Let me tackle the first piece of that. So Board of Investments in the Thai ministries are that 40% is the threshold you need to be at to have local content to be classified as a Thai manufacturer. And to get to that, and that 40% can be made up of, obviously, local products that you buy locally, your labor costs that you put into that, energy costs that you can attribute to that, packaging, materials, and as they say, royalties. So it's not that. So then if you're importing then some of your major components from China still, which is duty free, into China, into Thailand, and then Thailand if you can work on that 40% number, then from there to the USA is 0 to 5%. So so it's a combination. And then what most people do, and with this person is probably asking the question, you import you're from China, really work hard around keeping it so you can get the at least 40% in Thailand, and then localize as time goes on, and continue to add more value in Thailand. I think Steve's got a good example of the auto industry when he was there, and with that Volvo example, Steve.
Yeah, so it was an automotive manufacturing. They're building up cars from kits that were sent in from Europe, and they were struggling to meet the 40% threshold. Ultimately, a couple of simple decisions got us over the line. So basically, we said we don't need the stereos for the cars and we don't need the aluminium rims. We're able to source those locally. They had fairly high value in the total package, and just by doing that simple move, effectively meant that we met the 40% threshold, and then the benefit of local content, meeting the local content requirements. So there is some pretty simple things that you can do, and there is a fair bit of flexibility in Thailand when you're working in this area. And there's lots of companies that are willing to help you out as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Mark, please.
No. That I'm just saying, it was to reiterate what Steve was saying is, Thailand will work with you on this, from the government, from the contract manufacturers. You might work from the raw materials. So we haven't run across anyone that I can think of that has had a problem getting to that 40% local content, with the way you build the product costs up.
Yeah, I was thinking about that same point, because this company was saying they're evaluating the tariff implications, right? So they can determine their ROI and whether this financially is going to work. And I can't think of many clients we have not had to, when we're working with them, and we're talking to this company now, the likelihood of getting on the 40%, and it'll come through the analysis, looks pretty good, because there's so much more you can do in Thailand, even if you're bringing in a heavy percentage from China for the raw materials. That led, then the follow-up question was, what do they anticipate if they're going to close their operations in China? And I know that's a little off topic, but
yeah, a little bit. Well, yeah, there's the hardscape, meaning there's the leases and the equipment and that sort of thing, and that's relatively straightforward. Typically, what we have found, which takes longer, anywhere from 6 to 18 to 24 months, is to really net out your VAT with working with the tax authorities. So if you do decide to close 100%, you work with the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Tax to make sure you've done all the closing out on the VAT, which can be kind of cumbersome, because at times China doesn't really want you leaving. If you've had some incentives and they're still in place, that you've got to work with the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Tax on that. Also, too, if you're working with a lot of big suppliers and then you're leaving and maybe you're not going to use them anymore, you got to be cautious of, are you setting up a competitor because their biggest customer is leaving, meaning perhaps being you. So those are all the kind of things. But if you just ask people, how many people know about closing factories in China 15 years ago, there wouldn't have been very many. A lot would tell you how to open one, but not how to close one. The last 5 years, us in particular, we've done a lot of work with closing facilities, both the lease, the building, but more importantly, the taxes and the labor issues. Because you don't want to leave on a bad foot, and you may want, and maybe you're still doing a China plus one, so you may want to come back, so you want to just do things the right way.
Yeah, very, very fair point. Look, we got another question popped up. Chemical company said they're in the process right now of just evaluating. They're in China, want to look at evaluating a China plus one model. You're putting in an operation and sourcing and in Thailand. So the question is, what kind of metrics, what kind of questions should they be evaluating to determine what's the right region in Asia Pacific, and is Thailand the right country?
Again, we have kind of 8 things. It sounds like a prepackaged, but kind of basic metrics that are, this isn't rocket science. I think you guys would know that. It's labor costs, it's labor availability, it's staffing, it's market lease rates, existing facilities, it's building costs, and building costs to either fit out an existing building, clean room, offices, utilities. If you're a big user of electricity or water, the utilities become really important. Yeah. What's the availability of industrial parks, and how do they work with you? Investment incentives, a huge issue, right? How hard is it to set up a business, set up a new entity, to get established, that sort of thing. You always have to keep in the back of your mind corruption, intellectual property theft, things of that nature. So those are really kind of the 8 things that we run through a lot with our clients, and make sure we know, how's the labor situation, how's the tax situation, how's the building cost situation, how's your utilities, how's the industrial parks, and of course, as I said, incentives. How friendly is the business? And again, between BOI and the industrial parks, they can make it, I won't say painless, but less pain than a lot of countries. And then, of course, Thailand, Steve mentioned, he talked to me a little bit about that on the corruption IP thing. Yeah, sometimes there is. I mean, Thailand is no different. They're I think 100 on the corruption list. Most of that is more local corruption, stuff at the port, things of that nature, not the overall top stuff. And so, and then IP. One thing about we found in Thailand versus China, I have never found that Thailand Inc. is trying to steal any of mine or my clients' intellectual property. And in China, I could never have said that.
Yeah, fair point. So, Steve, would you add anything on top of that?
No, agree with everything Mark said there.
Yeah. So another question came in, Steve. I think this is for you. It's a company that electronics company, and the point where they had a facility in China, and they had one in Thailand actually a long time ago, and it was in northern Thailand, and they were asking about the fact that their business is growing substantially, and they use a lot of electrical engineers, a lot of industrial engineers. Does Thailand, right, in the EEC region, which is kind of the new area, kind of southeast of Bangkok, there's the ability to get quality engineers, industrial engineers, electrical engineers. Are they pretty available in Thailand?
The reality is that's where they all want to work. So you really find that there is the brain drain from the regions, particularly north of Thailand. Everybody, particularly in those sort of areas with those sort of educational levels, they really want to work in the EEC because that's where the big companies are. They want to work for international companies. They're treated more fairly, fairer benefits, management, more fairer and balanced, I would say. So, that's where everybody wants to work. The reality is there is companies coming all the time, and there is a finite amount of graduates available or skilled people. So there always is that pressure there, but Thailand's very good at reacting where there's shortages and focusing and developing for those. So I don't see that as a significant issue. Being in the north, it probably would be a significant issue because you've got a very small pool of potential employees.
Yeah, that's a very good point about EEC versus North. Look, I know we're closing in on the 1 hour, and we promised to have you in and out. One quick question here. We got question number 6 was asked, and the executive just emailed again. Want to make sure we cover that about summarizing kind of the Thai-U.S. trade relations. And if you could, Steve, you give your perspective there on the ground in Thailand.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, there is a Thai-US Amity Treaty in place, first established in 1833, actually, and was reconfirmed during the Vietnam War in 1968. So this allows US companies to engage in business activities on similar terms as Thai companies. US is the only country that has that. The US is exempt from most of the restrictions imposed by the Foreign Business Act. And the key benefit of that for US companies is they're exempt from the requirement of having a 51% controlled and joint venture or partnership. So US companies can set up in Thailand with 100% US ownership. So that is a big advantage that US companies have over companies from any other country. Regarding tariffs, Thailand is classified by the US as a most favored nation, and many of the tariffs are zero, and any tariff there are in place are relatively small and a fraction of those compared to China. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything there, Mark.
No, again, the relationship between the USA and Thailand has been strong. Obviously since the 1800s, but going back to Vietnam and then going back to in the 80s when the business started to really take off. So no, it's a good relationship. Even and it's even getting stronger with the Cobra Go and the geopolitical stuff between Thailand and the USA. So no, I think it's a great relationship.
Yeah, very strong.
One question came in, and we kind of covered this a little bit in the case study one. This company is coming in, and they note that they're not large enough to set up a plant in Thailand, but they want to know about contract manufacturers in Thailand. And it says based on the conversation, it seems that the supply chain there is strong, but not sure about contract manufacturers. They use contract manufacturers globally, molding plus assembly, or what is needed. Can you address this? So I will throw that up to both of you. This company is looking for contract manufacturers in Thailand, mostly in molding and assembly. There's an awful lot of contract manufacturing there, but
yeah, no, I would certainly say that is, again, I don't know the specifics of what they want to have made, but whether it's electronics, injection molding, metal fabrication, petrochemical, valving, flow controls, a lot of suppliers and contract manufacturers that can do that in Thailand. If you look at the appliance industry, as Steve mentioned, the air conditioning industry, the motorcycle industry, the computer chip industry, Seagate, largest place in the world now making their products have a tremendous amount of suppliers. So no, that's something that's been developing and building for 40 years.
And we find, I think, a lot of companies oftentimes feel more comfortable with contract manufacturing initially before they get in necessarily to establish a facility. A lot of them will take that route, or they may not have enough business to build a factory, but they go the route of contract manufacturers.
That's right. I mean, it's you can limit your investment, or if they just want to go ahead and go down there and just lease a facility, and then they don't have to have the cost to build a facility, buy a facility, build a facility. And that's why these industrial parks have quite a few already pre-built facilities from, as I said, 5,000 to 15, 20, 30,000 square meters that you can go in and fit out pretty quickly for your operation.
Yeah, I mean, we've had good success finding contract manufacturers in Thailand. There's just so many of them. They've got such an infrastructure there manufacturing. Well, look, I know that final question took us over. So it is now a couple minutes after. We will end the webinar now. Appreciate people staying on but I want to answer that final question that came through. I'd like to thank Mark Plum and Steve Blythe for taking the time and their expertise to do this. And I again thank everyone for participating on that, and the large number of people we had signed up and that registered for the event. Thank you for the questions. And if you have any further questions, please let us know, and we'll get back to you on those, answer them individually. So this now concludes today's webinar. Thank you.